Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. Welcome to Putting Housing on the Map, the introduction to pet inclusive housing map. I said that weird. The introduction to the pet inclusive housing map. My name is Jillian McMillian. I'm a consultant and board member with My Dog is My Home. I've been with My Dog is My Home for 2.5 years or a little bit more, and I'm excited to be moderating this wonderful session. C.A.R.E, Companions and Animals for Reform and Equity, and Michelson Found Animals Pet Inclusive Housing Initiative have partnered to create an interactive map to monitor progress in advancing fair and equitable access to pet inclusive housing in the U.S. The map is being launched this year and includes data on multiple levels of pet inclusiveness in housing. This map will also look at the prevalence of pet-friendly and pet-inclusive properties through the lenses of various economic, demographic, and community variables. And here to discuss this in further detail are Ross Barker and Sloane Hawes.
Thanks, Jillian. My name is Ross Barker, and I want to thank My Dog is My Home for inviting us to be here today. I'm the program director for the Pet Inclusive Housing Initiative, or PIHI. You'll probably hear me refer to it as that as we go along. Our mission is to build a stronger and more pet inclusive housing industry. And through our research, we develop resources, partnerships, and tools to increase the availability of pet inclusive housing. So I come to this work from what I acknowledge as a very privileged background. And what I mean by that is that I've never had to worry about where my next meal was going to come from or whether I was going to have a roof over my head that night. I've also been blessed by having pets with me my entire life without ever having to consider surrendering them so I could find a suitable place to live. So I know that I have that privilege. And because of the joy and support that pets have always given me, I'm driven to help ensure that everyone else has that same opportunity, regardless of the circumstances they find themselves in. I'm really excited to be here to talk about this topic with you today. Sloane?
All right. Hey, y'all. I'm Sloane Hawes, pronoun she, her, and I am the Chief of Research and Development at Companions and Animals for Reform and Equity, or C.A.R.E. We are a BIPOC-led national nonprofit organization that is focused on advancing human and animal well-being, particularly for historically marginalized and socially vulnerable folks. My role at C.A.R.E is supporting our participatory research agenda, which informs our internal programming services and policies. And then also externally through partnerships like this one we've got going on with PIHI to advance human and animal well-being for all folks. So excited to share this research with y'all. In terms of my positionality around the issue, I identify as a white cisgender woman. I do have lived experience of housing insecurity. I'm also the volunteer commissioner for my local housing authority. I'm also a parent and caregiver for 2 young people, 2 dogs, and 6 chickens. That's a little about me. So I'm going to go a little bit into what we're going to cover here today. We've got a quick session, so this is going to be rapid fire. We're just going to do questions at the end, just to make sure we get through all this information for y'all. But if you have burning questions, feel free to drop it in the Q&A, and Jillian's going to help us field those. So we're going to talk a little bit today about our new dynamic pet inclusive housing map. We are going to talk about how this map can be used to monitor progress in advancing fair and equitable access to pet inclusive housing. And then we have some visuals that demonstrate the relationship between availability of pet inclusive housing and the demographic characteristics of a community. Next slide, please. A little bit about the background of how this collaboration and how this map came to be. As Jillian noted, it is a collaboration between C.A.R.E and Michelson Found Animals PIHI. It is supported through generous funding from Spring Point Partners. The purpose of this, again, is to get a dynamic picture of what's happening in the pet inclusive housing opportunity across communities. And I just want to real specifically call out, the intention of this map was not to duplicate efforts already underway, right? We have amazing resources for tenants and folks seeking housing, like the Pets of the Homeless resource and the My Pitbull is Family resources. The purpose of this map is really specifically as for ongoing research and evaluation, as well as monitoring about what's happening. It's really not intended as a tool for individual families with pets. And so we're happy to dive deeper into that and receive any feedback that y'all have about that. But really the purpose of this is more for research and evaluation. overall, the big picture here is we want this to equip advocates and practitioners with what they need to bolster their arguments to advance fair and equitable housing for people and pets. Next slide. This is just a little bit about the data set behind what we have used here for the map, the Social Vulnerability Index. Some of y'all might already be familiar with it, so forgive me if this is information you already know. This is a SVI, is what it's been referred to as. It's the acronym. It's managed by the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, and the ATSDR. These are federal agencies, and so this is one of the data sets that was impacted. It has been restored, but it has been preserved. But so just noting, this is the federal data set that has been targeted. It is an index of 16 U.S. Census variables that comes from that 5-year American Community Survey. So you get data every 5 years from this. And the purpose of this originally was to identify communities that may need support before, during, or after disasters. But if you look on this right-hand side with what the variables are, we're increasingly seeing this SVI being used to understand vulnerability in other contexts like access to housing. So some of the variables you see here are socioeconomic status, the household characteristics like the age, folks with disabilities, whether folks have varying language proficiencies, and then racial and ethnic minority status, as well as housing types and transportation. Next slide. So yeah, the intention of this conversation and of this map in general is just to do like a soft launch, right? So we've noted that this isn't available yet. It's going to get launched here later this year. But this is kind of the inspiration quote behind the work, right? So the quote says, "We can choose to continue practices that perpetuate structural racism, or we can dismantle them and rebuild more just systems of care. The question becomes, what tools and models do we have at our disposal to accomplish the latter goal?" And so, the purpose of this map, at least from my perspective at C.A.R.E, is really coming from this place of, if we have the wrong information, we're going to come to the wrong conclusions every single time, right? If we're mapping the access to housing, or if we're not mapping it at all in the context of what's going on in the community, we're not actually going to make real meaningful change around making sure real humans and real individuals and their pets can access housing. I'm at a conference right now with a bunch of tenants organizers, the National Low Income Housing Coalition conference. And a lot of the conversations we're having is, if you control the narrative, you get to control the outcomes, right? And data has a lot of power to cut through all of the distortions and all the things that are going on in the landscape around who are unhoused folks, who are folks experiencing housing insecurity, all of the myths and all of the narratives, all the negative things that are said out there. The data that we're talking about here is just a small piece of that big picture, but really we're trying to cut through all the distortions around what the issues are around folks being able to access housing, and end goal is, promote justice and promote access to housing. And so this is just one tool that we're hoping is going to help advance housing justice for people and their pets. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Ross to talk a little bit about the map.
Thanks, Sloane. Yeah, this is exciting because it's the first time we've shown this any place, and it still is. I mean, Sloane mentioned soft launch. I'd say it's a pre-soft launch. I mean, this is just starting to start a discussion around this, and we'll continue to develop the map. At PIHI, much of our focus so far has been on permanent housing situations, but we really increasingly see the landscape as this broad continuum that spans both co-housing and permanent housing solutions. We know that eventually people and their pets will need long-term housing options, so our work has been to ensure that those solutions are available. The map itself is intended to help bridge those gaps between points along the continuum. So I want to just start with some basics before I show you the map itself. We've chosen 4 markets: Atlanta, Dallas, Los Angeles, and Philadelphia. The reason for that is the diversity of populations within those cities, but also one of our considerations was that C.A.R.E has programs that are set up and resources in place in and around those cities that we can use to help activate the research side of the effort. To build the map itself, we are working with the Veterinary Care Accessibility Project, or VCAP. The initial development is just incorporating these 2 pieces. So the SVI that Sloane mentioned a few minutes ago, and then the housing data that we are accessing through a subscription called Smart Apartment Data. This gives us a really broad view into rental housing data across the country. It's continuously updated and allows us to look at properties in terms of their location, size, their style of the building, in addition to the pet policies, including things like breed restrictions, size restrictions, and fees. So we can evaluate those properties based on all those characteristics. And the data we are tapping into right now is from February. And I want to really reiterate what Sloane said about the purpose of the tool. It's intended as a tool for analysis to evaluate and to see where we are so that we can measure where we are headed in terms of pet inclusive policies and be lots of ways to use it in the future. It's not intended to be a reference tool for runners searching for pet inclusive housing. Sloane mentioned organizations already doing this. I always, one place I always point people to is My Pitbull Is Family. They've done a really great job of aggregating a lot of properties for people to go look at if they need particularly dog inclusive housing. So all these tools, we don't ever want to duplicate what's being done out there, the great work that's being done. We want to complement it. And so that's what this is intended to do. So I want to just talk about our starting place. That's where we are right now. We're just getting this started. Our initial steps have been to plot the properties that show us pet friendly, meaning they allow pets in. They show that way in smart apartment data, and then overlay the SVI. Really, we're at PIHI, we've been very specific, very deliberate about calling out the difference between pet friendly and pet inclusive. We don't see them as interchangeable terms. They're not synonyms. It's something really different, right? It's a different bar. When we say pet friendly, because we hear this term a lot, it generally just means that pets are allowed in some sense, right? But there's going to be breed restrictions, at least, or some size restrictions. There's going to be fees, several types of fees that we'll see charged, and probably no amenities for pets. But they allow some pets so they can, the properties can justify calling themselves pet friendly, right? We're really trying to move towards pet inclusive, is being very different. And this is our working definition. I mean, we're not the only organization using this term. It's definitely being embraced and used by lots of organizations and across the industry. Just to put some bounds around it, that we've defined it in this way. So it's dogs and cats allowed. It's not having breed or size restrictions. It's not having non-benefit fees. So let me explain what we mean by non-benefit. We're talking about fees that are arbitrary. They are not necessarily, if you ask a housing provider what those fees are for, they wouldn't be able to tell you. And so what we want to be able to do is if they're going to be fees, they at least need to be adding some value for me as a pet owner with my pet, right? So are there ample waste stations? Is there a well-maintained exercise and relief area, those kinds of things, right? And if that's something, then it's a little bit easier to justify those fees. So we definitely would like to see all fees go away, but at the same time, if they're going to be fees, they should at least be able to be explained. And then just having basic amenities. I mentioned exercise relief areas and waste stations. Those are the big ones, right? I mean, it doesn't, grooming stations, all that is nice, those amenities, but they aren't necessary, right? So we're just talking about the basics here. So that's what we are mapping right now as pet-friendly properties. So let's take a look at this. First ever view of this map outside of a few people on our combined team here. So I'm going to show three views. The first one is the furthest zoomed out version of this, and these are all static, so you're not going to be able to do anything with them at this point. This is Atlanta. So I said before, we have 4 markets. One of them is Atlanta. So we have taken properties. All the properties in Atlanta are represented by the dots, and the red dots allow pets. The green dots do not allow pets. And then we have integrated with that is the social or socioeconomic vulnerability index, right? So we can see that the red area is the most vulnerable. And you can already at this high level begin to see the red dots start to kind of concentrate around these red shaded areas, right? It's hard to tell. There's a very high level view at this point. Just going to give a minute to orient you to that, because the next 2 are going to basically show the same thing, but they're just going to go further in. Okay, so let's dig in a little bit further. And you begin to see even more of a story here. You begin to see, if you really look at the red shaded areas, okay, there's a lot more red dots there. Again, those are the most vulnerable. But here you begin to see in the green areas, the green shaded areas, which are the least vulnerable areas in terms of SVI, you start to see more properties that allow pets. Overall, what we can say is that just taking out the shaded areas, there's a lot of places that don't allow pets, right? So even if you just even if you take off the SVI piece of this, you're going to see a lot of red dots, right? And that's part of what we're trying to address as well. But the map here allows us to look even deeper and see what's going on in particular communities. So let's look at the last view I've got. And this really starts to make it a little more, you can see even more clearly now as you go further into a particular area. If you look at that left side of the page, there are this red area, and a lot of red dots in there that are clustered together. And then if there's a few green areas as you work your way around the chart where you can see lots of properties that allow pets, outnumbering the ones that do not allow pets. So this is what we're beginning to see. I mean, if we can then look at these things just using these two variables, right? Just using the pets versus no pets with the SVI and look at that and see, okay, well, there's some things going on here that we need to try to address. What's really behind, what is making these properties less pet friendly, right? Why is that, and what can we do about it? How can we bring more equity to these areas in terms of the pet inclusiveness? And so we'll use this to drill down further over time. As we look ahead, what we'll be doing is adding details and layers. And we have grand ambitions for this map, among them to add in the different levels of pet inclusiveness. So going back to those other things like restrictions and fees and amenities. And so we can not just look at red dots versus green dots, but look at all the layers of pet inclusivity along that range. And
Ross,
yeah.
Somebody popped in with a question that's kind of relevant to where to us looking at this map in real time. Somebody had written, I am curious if you speak to these housing providers that are not pet friendly, and if you hear any common responses on why they are not allowed.
We have had a lot of conversations with housing providers, and as I mentioned earlier, our focus for our program PIHI has been running for about 3.5 years now, and in that time we spent a lot of that effort talking to multifamily and other kinds of housing providers. And the biggest things we hear are it's things you're not going to be surprised about. It's damages, it's liability related to quote unquote aggressive breeds. Right. And so our conversations with those things, it's allergies, another one, but those are damages and liability related to what they consider aggressive breeds, or what they're told are aggressive breeds, are the two biggest. Right. And so our conversations with them try to build awareness and educate around that breed is not an indicator of aggression, right? And so what are other ways that they can mitigate the risk in their properties? So we find alternative ways. We're looking at the individual dog, right, instead of looking at the breed. We have to figure out damages. The damages we know from our research, the damages are not as great as people think they are. So those are the conversations we'll take to those housing providers. But we also think that it's got to be done from the other side. It's got to be done with some policy changes too. So I think it's going to have to be a sort of a coming together of both trying to educate housing providers about why it's beneficial to them and good for everybody to change their policies, but we're going to have to force that a little bit too through legislation, and talk a little bit about that in just a minute. But that's a really good question, and I would love to hear, I mean, follow up conversations with people who have had conversations with housing providers and what you're hearing, because I think that would, we always like to hear more about what is going on. And I think that what we'll see in this mapping exercise too is that they're not going to be the same issues every place, right? So maybe the challenges are different in a SVI red area versus an SVI orange area or a green area. We don't know, right? And that's what we want to try to figure out, and that'll help drive our solutions. That's a really good question.
Yeah, and Ross, I think that's a great pivot into a little bit. I wanted to give you all a little insight into what C.A.R.E and our team is planning to do with some of this map data. The idea is to use this map to guide what is real community specific and community driven intervention strategy development, right? So that's a lot of words, but really the main thing is like, we're not just doing research, we're not just creating this map for research sake, right? That is not only unethical, it's also a terrible waste of resources. And we already acknowledge that this is not a resource per se for individual families seeking housing, but that doesn't mean that this is just research for research sake, right? So the purpose of this research or this map is to be part of a broader strategy to develop community specific strategies for and community-led solutions for whatever the housing challenges that are happening in each individual district that we're looking at, right? So the essentially what C.A.R.E is planning to do with this map is it's part of multiple layers of this. Where to Ross's point, we want to dive deep into the number of having the number of available properties that allow housing versus don't. That's data that we can bring into some of these other activities like policy assessments. We're going to dive deep into the policies in each of these areas. Doing focus groups with lived experience experts. I think we have a lot of research so far around the perspectives of landlords, of the perspectives of quote unquote housing providers. I would challenge you all around whether they're providing housing or if they're gatekeeping who has access to housing, but some of them prefer to be called housing providers, right? So, but in this case, the big gap in the research is we don't have an idea, we don't have a lot of research, we have anecdotes, but we need to take those stories and turn them into facts, right? And take them to the positions of power, speak the truths of power in a way that they're going to understand. So we're going to conduct focus groups and interviews and start gathering those stories, those narratives from folks who have experienced not having housing that doesn't allow pets. What are not only the short-term barriers and challenges, but what are the long-term impacts of discriminatory policies towards folks that have pets? And then we're going to ask in each specific location, so in a red SVI zone compared to a green SVI zone, what are the priorities? What are the specific policies that we need to counter, that we need to address, that we need to add, that we need to remove? What are the specific programming areas that are lacking, that are needed? It might not actually be housing, right? We're talking about housing as a bigger part of an intersectional system around people's economic opportunity. It's their access to schools and education. It's also their access to transportation, right? Where you live really impacts your health. So there's health implications for these housing questions. And so we want all that to be on the table. And that's why this SVI data paired with the mapping of availability of housing is so, so powerful. And so the idea is that you take all of that data that you collect through lit review, through focus groups, through policy assessments, you identify what the community specific priorities and solutions are. And then that goes directly into action, which hopefully is led through partnerships, because none of us can do everything by ourselves, right? We need to partner with the folks on the ground. We need to partner with the folks that do the things that we can't do, the things that folks have been doing for a longer time. And so that's just a quick example of like how we might use this map data to inform actual programming on the ground. I apologize if there's background noise. I'm in a public space right now.
So I know we're getting up close on the time, so we'll go quickly through these next few slides. We do want to talk about some practical steps, and these are just things that Sloane's already kind of started to talk about those, right? Some of the things we'll do with the research and integrate these pieces. We'll use this to inform policy efforts, and so there's a few things that have already happened, that happened towards the end of last year and early into this year. And people on this call, I hope, some of you are here. I think you are. I know some of you are attending this conference, have been super instrumental in having these things happen and taking leads on these things. And so I'm not positioning these as PIHI wins. I'm positioning this as wins for people with pets in general. But shout out to all those groups that have been involved with these things. Colorado passed a big bill last year, and it's going to limit pet rent and cap deposits, right? DC, huge effort there among money groups to get this passed, and so that's I think probably the biggest city to have something so comprehensive. So that's a big win. And then in Evanston, they eliminated their breed restrictions. So it's a start, right? Kind of we pushed them to try to throw the size restrictions in there. They didn't want to go that far, but it's a start, right? And that's what we talk about this is it's a journey, right? So if we can make any switches, any shifts, then those are wins. Looking ahead into the next few legislative sessions, this is just a very small sampling. I don't know what those yellow lines are. Very small sampling of of some things that are happening over the next couple of sessions, right? Maybe this year even still. I know in California, Colorado, Hawaii, Illinois, Massachusetts, and Maine, they're all things happening, all those places and others as well. So we're excited to see what happens.
Yeah, I think the other thing is a really important strategy to put voice to is also the community-based and the individual tenant strategy. So know your rights campaigns are happening and have been happening, for hundreds of years at this point, right? Making sure that folks understand what the landscape is around these issues and what their rights are within that. And so, one of the things that C.A.R.E has been putting together is these know your rights things around pet inclusive fair housing. Things as tedious as what does the Fair Housing Act say about emotional support animals, about service animals, which animals are included, which animals are excluded, understanding what are the local specific laws around pets, what are the requirements for properties versus what are the things that get left to the jurisdictions of those municipalities in particular. And so just really, again, taking these deep dives into what the local context is, what the local policies are, and then making sure that the information is shared broadly to people who are going to be impacted by these issues. This is another, this map will help us guide that strategy of maybe we prioritize, the red high SBI zones with the lowest density of properties that allow pets. Maybe those are the places we start with to canvas with this know your rights information. So that's another practical suggestion. And then I already mentioned partnerships. I just wanted to plug these 3 amazing organizations that have been really a critical part in addition to our partnership with PIHI to some of the work that we're doing currently and that we plan to do in the future. Shout out to Heart LA. They're the best. If you don't know them, reach out. I know they spoke and had a workshop yesterday. National Low Income Housing Coalition. That's the conference I'm at here today in DC. These are the tenants' rights organizers. These are the folks who are doing housing work every day, boots on the ground. If you want to get networked into housing stuff, I cannot recommend them enough. They have an amazing campaign that actually just released a pet related fact sheet that's called the Opportunity Starts at Home campaign. They have a lot of resources for all other kinds of things related to housing. And then the American Public Health Association is another organization that's focused on housing as a public health issue. I'm a member of the public health social work section. So there are interdisciplinary groups. There's also a One Health section. So if you have any questions about organizations or institutions outside of animal welfare and then also in the housing space of just like what the landscape looks like, I'm happy to download, share strategies. And if y'all have suggestions for orgs to connect with, please do drop those in the chat.
I think we have three minutes for questions.
Oops. Okay. That's not too bad. Let's see. We have one question here. Landlords have to follow their insurance providers' restrictions. Most insurance companies have dog breed restrictions. How can we address that?
Great question. It connects well with the other question that we've discussed around the liability. So there are several insurance companies that do not ask about breed in their policies. This is true both the renters insurance policies, which impacts our discussion, but also the commercial liability. They don't ask about breeds. And so our first recommendation is, have you really checked your policies? Because we often think that's sort of a knee-jerk, easy reaction when we ask about policies is to say our insurance won't allow it. So we first ask rental housing providers to go look at their policies. Is that really the case? If it is, are you open to exploring other options, right? And so those are the kinds of discussions we have. Additionally, we probably need, this is one we probably need to address through policy, through legislation. I know that I'll call it the ASPCA here. Susan Riggs has been very, I don't know if Susan's on or not, but they've been very active in trying to make these kinds of things happen. We've got some work going with HWA as well to try to address this. So I think that's sort of one of the next pieces of legislation we need to work on.
And looks like there's one question actually that I do have from us at My Dog Is My Home, actually. The question of why pets, why now? During this bubbling time of chaos, what would be your response to those questions?
I'll start. Just say, I mean, pets are always going to be part of the family, right? I mean, so in a time where services are being taken away and people are having a harder and harder time getting what they need, we can't exclude pets at that time, right? I mean, so yeah, we just got to continue to have them in that conversation. It should never be a question of, and we're trying to focus on, you help the family, you also help the pet, right? It's not one or the other, right? It's both at the same time.
And I
Jillian.
think I will say housing is the great intersectional issue, right? There's all those phrases, right? Like home is where the heart is. Housing should come first. Housing is a right, and I think to Ross's point, like, and pets are members of the family. So if folks are going to have a home, they need to have a home where their whole family can stay. But I would also just insert, the takeaway from part of this map is that, like, what pets being in the household is going to look like the strategy and the path we need to take to get to that goal. It's going to be different in each community. It might be different for each household, right? What they need, what the amenities they want access to, what a good home looks like for a pet. Those are going to vary. And so I hope that advocates and researchers and practitioners are engaging in that real person-based approach when they're thinking with that sense of urgency, like move at the speed of what the community wants. Don't move at the speed of, whatever you have in your head as the end goal.
Yeah, that's perfectly said. All right. Well, it looks like there's some more questions in the Q&A, so maybe you can get back to those a
Yep.
little bit later.
Yep.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation, and I'm excited to see this map come to into fruition.
Thank you. I want to do one more real quick thank you to SpringPoint Partners for because they funded this collaboration, and so it's because of them that we're able to do this work, which we hope will be really groundbreaking. So thank you to SpringPoint.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you.